Snow fell slowly onto dense fir trees, muffling sounds and making everything resemble an old fairy tale. Here, 3 hours from the nearest Montana town, human footprints were rare. Only animals and the wind roamed freely. And Jacob Walker, a young, solitary forest ranger, with a rifle over his shoulder and a perpetual shadow of weariness in his eyes. He had arrived in these parts 6 months ago, tired of city life and grieving his parents, who had died in a car crash. Jacob was seeking silence that bright lights and busy streets couldn't offer. Among white hills and dark pines, he hoped to find peace. But instead of peace, he found tracks, large, wide, almost canine, but not quite. They followed the frozen riverbank, led deep into the forest, and reappeared again. There was something strange about them, confident and lonely. Jacob had been following them for 3 days. He wasn't afraid, too exhausted to be afraid. In some strange way, he felt akin to the creature who left those prints. A wolf, he whispered to himself. A lone wolf. That night, the wind howled louder than usual. Inside his log cabin, scented with sandalwood and coffee, Jacob laid out a map. He marked every place he'd seen the tracks. Almost a circle. The wolf was clearly avoiding the center, the clearing by the frozen lake. Jacob knew that tomorrow everything would change. He would go there. At dawn, the sky painted itself in shades of lilac. Dressed in a warm jacket and fur hat, Jacob set off. He walked for hours until he reached the familiar clearing. The air was still. His heart began to pound harder. And then he saw it. Standing by the lake's edge under a slope was a creature both graceful and wild. A grey wolf with thick fur and penetrating eyes staring straight at him. No fear, no anger, only curiosity and loneliness. They locked eyes and time froze. Jacob took a step. The wolf didn't move. Another step. The snow crunched softly beneath his boots. The wolf's ears perked up, but still it stayed. You're like me, aren't you? Jacob spoke quietly. Suddenly, a shot rang out from the woods. The wolf bolted. Jacob turned. A man in camouflage stood at the clearing's edge, holding a rifle. His face was hidden under a hood, but his posture was sharp, trained. That's my kill, the man growled. Back off, kid. That's not prey, Jacob said firmly. That's a wolf. A lone one. Leave him be. The hunter squinted, paused for a heartbeat, then vanished into the forest as quickly as he had appeared. Jacob stood in the snow, staring at the trail left by the fleeing animal, uncertain if he would ever see him again. What he didn't know was that their fates had already intertwined, that behind this forest lay far more than he imagined. Pain, betrayal, salvation, and a friendship that defied words. The snow hadn't stopped for 3 days. It fell softly, almost tenderly, yet there was a threat in its stillness, a white silence that concealed tracks, sounds, life. Jacob sat by the cabin window, watching flakes settle on the frame. His thoughts were far away, on that clearing where he had seen the wolf. He couldn't forget that gaze. Not a flicker of fear, no aggression, just a silent question. Who are you? And then the gunshot. Sharp, alarming. The man in camouflage hadn't been just a hunter. There had been something violent, unnatural in his eyes. Jacob felt it in his gut, and he'd learned to trust his instincts. He spent the evening repairing the snowmobile, knowing he'd be heading out again the next day. The wolf had run, but he was wounded, or at least shaken. Jacob couldn't walk away from this. Something inside demanded he see it through. The next morning he rode to the southern slope, denser woods, hidden cliffs. He moved slowly, scanning the snow. Then he saw it, a blotch in the white. Blood. He stepped off the snowmobile and approached, bright red against the white. Nearby, paw prints, deep and uneven. The wolf had been limping. Jacob knelt, touched the snow, still fresh. No more than half an hour old. He moved on quickly, nearly running, careful not to lose the trail. 20 minutes later, he saw him again. The wolf lay at the base of a tree, breathing heavily. His front leg was injured, grazed by a bullet, the muscle torn, but no broken bone. Jacob froze. His heart pounded, but he didn't move closer. He crouched and without looking directly at the animal spoke. "I'm not your enemy. I came to help." The wolf raised his head, growled, low, warning, but still no hatred in his eyes. Jacob removed his gloves, laid them gently on the snow, and took out antiseptic and bandages from his backpack. He knew one wrong move, and the wolf would vanish into the forest, to die, cold and bleeding. "I get it. You don't trust me. I wouldn't either," he continued. "But if you want to live, I need to come closer." He inched forward. The wolf didn't move. Another step. The growl faded, as if giving permission. Carefully, Jacob cleaned the wound and wrapped the leg. The wolf flinched, whimpered, but didn't bite. And when it was done, he simply lay there and closed his eyes. "You trust me now," Jacob whispered. "More than I expected." He stayed nearby, lit a small fire to keep them warm. That night, as snow began falling again, the wolf stood, approached, and lay at Jacob's feet. From that day, their story changed. They were no longer two loners. They were something more. The night passed in quiet agreement. Jacob didn't sleep. He couldn't. Whether out of fear that the wolf would wake and leave, or from a strange feeling of no longer being alone. Next to the fire, on moss softened by snow, lay a living, breathing creature, and it breathed in sync with him. At dawn, the wolf stood. He limped but held his ground firmly. He walked a few steps, then stopped and sat down. Jacob understood. This wasn't flight. It was a choice to stay. "Grey," he said quietly. "If you're going to be with me, you need a name. Grey. It suits you." Of course, the wolf didn't answer, but he also didn't turn away. From that morning on, he was Grey. The following days passed quickly. Jacob returned to the cabin, now with Grey. He made a warm shelter beside the wall, brought food, and read aloud in the evenings. At first, for himself, but soon, as if for both of them, the wolf listened, reacted, sometimes whimpered softly, sometimes locked eyes with him as if he understood. There were no words to explain it, but a connection formed, not dominance, not taming, something deeper, an acknowledgement of loneliness in each other. One morning, Jacob stepped onto the porch and saw Grey standing near a tree, alert, fur raised, ears tense. He growled. Someone was in the woods. Jacob grabbed his rifle, not out of fear, but out of instinct. He knew it wasn't a bear or a deer. It was a man. Half an hour later, he found more tracks, large, heavy, and a cigarette butt in the snow. Crushed underfoot, bent branches, camouflage fibers caught on bark. The hunter was back. Jacob didn't know why he'd returned, but he felt it wasn't good, not good at all. He started locking the cabin at night, hid the snowmobile under cover, always kept the rifle nearby. Gray never left his side, as if sensing the same tension. That night, Jacob dreamed of the forest, that first meeting, and the gunshot, but now he was the one being shot at. He awoke in a cold sweat. Gray lay by his bed, softly whining. "You feel it too," he whispered. Gray lifted his head, no fear in his eyes, only readiness. He was no longer just an animal, he was a guardian. The cabin had turned into an improvised headquarters. Emma Brooks had taken off her snow-dusted jacket and placed a tablet with maps and thermal images on the wooden table. She moved with the precision of someone who had worked alone for a long time, among cold, risk, and lies. "His name is Tom Blake," she said, showing a photo of a man in a black beanie with a hard-edged face. "Former military, now an illegal hunter. Leaves no trace. Skins animals, sometimes kills for sport. Carries a rifle with a thermal scope and suppressor. Very dangerous." Jacob nodded grimly. He'd already figured that out. "Why is he here?" he asked. "We believe he's not hunting just any animal," she whispered. "He's after one specific wolf." Gray perked up. It was as if he understood the meaning of the words. Why him specifically? Emma pulled out a folder filled with reports, photos, and drone scans. "He's an alpha male from a critically endangered lineage, genetically pure. Scientists have been trying to track and protect him for years. But someone," she glanced at Jacob, "wants to erase what they can't control." "Psychopath," Jacob muttered. "Worse. A hunter who believes that if he can't dominate something, it must be destroyed." Outside, twilight thickened. Gray moved to the door, sniffing the air. Something was wrong. Emma joined him, peering into the trees. "He's close. I can feel it. Tonight, he'll hunt." Jacob loaded his rifle. "Then we'll be ready." They set out close to midnight. Emma with the thermal scope, Jacob with his rifle, Gray a silent shadow ahead. They moved toward an old camp, where Jacob once found discarded wrappers and fire remains. But now it was deserted, until it wasn't. Just as they were about to leave, Gray growled. "Back!" Emma shouted, and a gunshot rang out. The bullet ricocheted off a tree a few feet away. Jacob dropped. Emma drew her pistol. In the darkness, eyes gleamed. Human. "Stay away," a hoarse voice called from the forest. "This is my land. My kill." "Tom, this is Brooks. You're breaking federal law. Drop your weapon." Laughter, low and hollow. "The law. The law is the gun. Power. And that animal of yours, it's just meat." Silence. Then movement. Gray sprang. A cry. Sharp, brief. Then silence again. When Jacob reached the clearing, he saw Tom Blake on his back, clutching a bleeding arm. Gray stood over him, not biting, just holding him down. "He didn't kill him," Emma whispered. "He just stopped him." "Because he's more human than some of us," Jacob said, looking at the wolf. Morning came grey and heavy. Snow had turned to slush beneath their boots. The tension from the night before lingered, even with Tom Blake tied up and lying on the cabin floor under Gray's watchful eyes. Emma paced the room, speaking into her satellite phone. Reinforcements would arrive in 2 days. A helicopter couldn't land yet due to weather. They were trapped, and Gray knew it first. "He's dangerous," Emma said, looking at Jacob. "Even tied up, he can play the victim, manipulate, Escape. I know, Jacob replied. But he's wounded, and now he knows the wolf is stronger than him. Or he's just waiting to strike back, she said grimly. Blake lay still, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. No remorse, only anger, and something else. Patience. Think you've won? He rasped. Think I'm alone? Emma turned to him. What do you mean? I'm bait. While you're sitting here, they're already coming. Who's they? A grin spread across his face, despite the blood and pain. People who don't care about wolves. They want the land. Kill the animal. First step. Emma paled. Jacob stepped forward. You're lying. Check. And then, in the distance, the low hum of engines. Oh no, Emma whispered. He's not lying, Grey growled. Jacob rushed to the porch. Snow whipped around the forest road as black SUVs approached, tires kicking up white powder. Not hunters, something worse. Mercenaries, Emma muttered behind him. 3 men stepped from the vehicles, dressed in black with no insignia. One held a shotgun, another an assault rifle. The third carried a tablet. We're looking for an animal, one of them said calmly. We have a client. We need it, alive or dead. Hand it over and we leave. No, Jacob said. Then things get ugly. A shot shattered the cabin window. Grey bolted to the back door. Jacob and Emma followed. They knew the woods. Those men didn't. They ran through trees, slipping on slopes, weaving between rocks. Grey led the way, silent, swift. He knew every trail. He was the map. Behind them, shouts, gunshots, snow disturbed by boots, blood on branches. But they didn't stop. They ran toward freedom, toward the chance to save more than Grey. They ran to save themselves. They returned to the old hunting shelter, half collapsed, weathered, cold. But it was shelter. Emma cleared debris from the floor while Jacob checked Grey's injured leg. The wolf limped, but stood tall. He wouldn't show weakness. We lost them, Emma whispered, peering out through a cracked board. For now, Jacob replied. How long? She didn't answer. Grey lay at the entrance, ears alert. He hadn't slept in 2 days, but he wouldn't rest yet. His trust now came with responsibility. They won't stop, Nate said, unpacking a thermal blanket from his backpack. Too much at stake. Too much proof, Emma added. We have recordings, photos, we can make a case. That'll take time, Jacob said, tightening the bandage. What about Grey? They'll hunt him again. Silence filled the small shelter. Outside, snow whispered against the trees. I can take him, Nate said. To Yellowstone. They'll accept him. He'll be safe. Protected. Jacob looked at Grey. The wolf lay calm, eyes glowing in firelight, as if he knew. He should decide, Jacob said quietly. That night, they didn't light a fire. Ate in silence. Slept in turns. And when a branch snapped outside the wall, they all froze. One person, Emma whispered. Soft footsteps. Not a mercenary. Jacob opened the door, rifle ready. A young man stood in the snow, winter coat, backpack, hands raised. I'm not with them, he called. I'm a biologist. My name's Nate. I've been tracking that wolf for a year. I know who he is. Prove it, Jacob said coldly. Nate pulled out a satellite beacon, a tablet, photos. Gray watched him, silent, then took a step forward, touched Nate's hand with his nose. He knows me, Nate said. He was born in Yellowstone. We raised him, released him. He disappeared. And you found him. And he found us, Jacob said softly. Now they were four. Four against the ones who hunted in shadows. But they had the forest, and they had Gray. We'll lead them to Black Ravine, Nate said. There's a trap, not for wolves, for those who think they own everything. Emma nodded. They think they're strong, but they've never met true wild will. The slopes were steep, trees bare, and only paw prints and boot marks remained in the wet snow. Gray led the way. Emma guarded the rear. Jacob moved in the middle. His heart thudded in his ears. Somewhere behind them, armed strangers. Ahead, uncertainty, but beside him, trust, and that mattered most. After several miles, they reached an old hunting cabin. Small, half-rotten, nearly collapsed. Jacob had once planned to tear it down, but now it was a refuge. No windows, soft walls, but it offered shelter from bullets and time. Here, Nate said, pointing to his GPS. This is where we set the trap. The slope will collapse if they step here, but someone has to lure them in. I'll do it, Jacob said. They know me. They'll follow. We won't let them kill you, Emma added. Will Gray go with you? Jacob looked at the wolf. Gray stood beside him, silent, ready. He'll go. He knows. The plan was simple. Jacob and Gray would lure the pursuers onto the narrow trail, slow them down, and signal. Emma and Nate would trigger the collapse. But nothing is ever truly simple in a world where some hunt and others protect. An hour later, it began. A sharp shot. A bullet hit the trunk of a tree 10 feet away. Another whistled overhead. Jacob ran. Gray ran with him, footsteps behind. 3 of them. One, older, heavy. Another, fast. The third, silent. A professional. Ahead, the ravine. The path was narrow. Gray darted ahead. Took position. Jacob stopped and fired a red flare into the sky. Ready! Emma's voice crackled in the radio. As the first pursuer stepped onto the ridge, earth crumbled beneath him. A roar. A landslide. Snow and rocks crashed down. Screams. Then silence. Dust settled. Where once was a path, now a chasm. Jacob stood, breath heavy. Gray came to his side, pressed his nose to Jacob's hand. We did it, he whispered, still in disbelief. Emma and Nate appeared from behind the trees. No words, just looks, just understanding. The threat had fallen. But the war wasn't over. There were more out there. But now, they wouldn't face them alone. They moved out before sunrise. 3 people and a wolf. An unusual, almost fairy tale image amidst the white expanse. But this was no tale. It was life on the blade's edge. The Black Ravine was a narrow canyon between rock faces, overgrown with firs, steep cliffs, and hidden trails. Jacob had been there once, and swore never to return. But today, there was no other choice. Nate led the way. He knew the path. His GPS showed hidden cameras he'd installed months ago, originally meant for wolf migration research. Now, the tech had become a weapon. Here, he said, stopping. This is the trap. The slope will collapse if they step here. All we have to do is lure them in. I'll go, Jacob said. They are after me. They'll follow. We'll cover you from the ridge, Emma said. Will Grey follow? Jacob looked at the wolf. Grey was already standing in position, calm and focused. He knows what to do. The plan was in motion. Jacob and Grey would draw the attackers onto the path, slow them, signal Emma and Nate, and they'd trigger the collapse. But nothing ever unfolds cleanly in the wild. Soon it began. A gunshot cracked the air. A bullet skimmed past a tree. Another zipped overhead. Jacob ran, Grey beside him. Voices behind. 3 again. One gasping, older. One silent, deadly. They neared the slope. Grey surged ahead. Took cover. Jacob stopped and raised the flare. A streak of red soared into the sky. All set, Emma's voice came through the radio. As the first of the hunters stepped onto the ridge, the ground gave way beneath his boots. A massive crack. Then an avalanche of stone and snow. Screams. Then silence. When the dust settled, the trail was gone. Jacob stood still, heart pounding. Grey came and touched his hand with his nose. We made it, he whispered. Emma and Nate appeared from the trees, weapons lowered. No cheers, no talk, just the understanding that something irreversible had been done, and it was necessary. They'd stopped this threat, but the world wouldn't stop turning. Others would come, but this time they would be ready, and they would never stand alone again. They returned to the cabin by evening, exhausted, soaked, drained. Grey was limping, but proud. He didn't let the pain show. Jacob cleaned the wound again, rewrapped the leg. Emma secured the doors and checked the windows. Nate tried to re-establish the signal, unstable. The mercenaries were still trapped beyond the ravine, but it was a temporary pause. The hunt had stopped, but eyes still watched from the shadows. They won't quit, Nate said to Jacob. There's too much money behind this. And too much evidence, Emma added. We have footage, photos. We can start a case. But that'll take time, Jacob said, pulling the bandage tight. And Grey? He's still in danger. Silence. I can take him, Nate said. To Yellowstone. He'll be safe there, under protection. Jacob looked at the wolf. Grey lay by the door, calm, still, but alert, like he understood. He should decide, Jacob said quietly. The next morning, just before sunrise, Grey was gone. His tracks led north, to Yellowstone. He made his choice, Nate said, gazing into the forest. He knows where he belongs. Emma smiled faintly. And he knows who will always be watching. That night, Jacob walked outside. The snow glistened under the moon. The forest stood still. In the silence, he could hear breathing. And then he saw them. Tracks, fresh, big, familiar. They led from the woods to the cabin. And back again. Grey had returned. Quietly. No sound. Just came to see. To check. And you can't forget either, Jacob whispered. He sat on the porch, never taking his eyes off the trees. Somewhere out there, a shadow stood, watching him. Bonds like this don't break. Some tracks stay forever. 3 days had passed. The snow began to melt on the southern slopes, revealing patches of moss and soil. The air filled with the scent of thawing earth. Spring was near, But the cabin remained quiet. Gray was gone. And with his absence, something inside Jacob quieted as well. Not emptiness, but something deeper, like a river flowing beneath ice. Nate had returned to Yellowstone with recordings, hard drives, and evidence, everything needed to begin the investigation. He promised to tell Gray's story, not just as a rare animal, but as a being who had changed lives. He won't disappear in reports, Nate had said. He'll live in memory, in science, in us. Emma stayed, not as an agent, she just stayed. They sat by the fire when a man in uniform approached the cabin, one of the rangers escorting the helicopter team. Calm and quiet, he handed over documents. Tom Blake confessed. The rest are under investigation. Your materials laid the foundation. Jacob said nothing, just nodded, then asked, Did Gray make it? The ranger smiled. He was seen yesterday in Yellowstone. Healthy, resting by a river, didn't run into the woods. It was like he was waiting. Jacob turned away. In his chest, something strange, not grief, not joy, something in between. He knows we haven't forgotten him, Emma said, placing a hand on Jacob's shoulder. That night, Jacob lit the fireplace and opened an old photo album. Inside, newspaper clippings, snapshots, reports, headlines. Endangered wolf population saved. Yellowstone pack expands. Gray, alpha of the 21st century. But the most valuable page was just a simple photo. Him and Gray in the snowy forest. Silence, snow, and trust. You became a legend, my friend, Jacob said. But to me, your family. Several months passed. Yellowstone thrived. Wolves roamed its valleys, deer grazed the open meadows, and the wind carried the soft rustling of pine trees. And among all of it, he remained. Gray, no longer a fugitive, no longer a wounded loner, now an alpha. Nate, now a lead wildlife researcher, received daily footage from drones and motion cameras. Gray appeared more and more often with others. One of them, a black she-wolf, watchful, always close. They called her Luna. A pack was forming, not out of fear, but out of strength. Strength Gray had given. One morning, Nate received a photo that stayed with him forever. Gray standing on a cliff under grey skies, his pack drinking from a stream below. He wasn't watching them. He was looking east, toward the Montana forest, toward the cabin, toward the man he'd once chosen, and who had chosen him. Jacob still rose before dawn. The trail to the old hilltop was clear now. He'd built a small bench from pine planks. He sat there, read books, sometimes aloud, sometimes just listened. He'd learned to hear the forest, to feel when animals were near, to know when a wind meant news. And one day, he heard it. A twig snapped, soft as breath. He turned. At the forest's edge stood a wolf, grey, strong, but older now. His coat thick, his eyes wise. It was Gray, yet more than him. He stood still, watching. He hadn't come to stay. He came to show. All was well. Life continued. Jacob nodded. A tear slid down his cheek. Thank you, he said. You're home. Then Gray turned and disappeared into the trees. No sound, no tracks, just presence. That night, Jacob lit the fireplace, opened the photo album. Among all the headlines and reports, one image remained untouched, him and the wolf. No title, no caption, just snow, forest, and a bond stronger than words. A year later, Yellowstone prepared for an international scientific delegation. Researchers, filmmakers, biologists. Everyone wanted to see the legendary wolf pack led by the Grey Alpha, who had once vanished into the mountains only to return and change everything. Nate guided the guests along the migration trails, showing paw prints, tufts of fur, thermal footage. But Grey hadn't been seen for 3 weeks. He no longer needs to be seen, Nate explained. He's done what he was meant to do. Now he's part of the forest. Back in Montana, far from the cameras and noise, Jacob still rose before dawn. His face was a little older, his scars deeper, but his eyes still held silence and expectation. He no longer waited for Grey. He simply lived, drank coffee, fixed the roof, looked toward the woods, not hoping but remembering. Then one morning in late May, they came. It was just before sunrise. The air was heavy with dew, and grass sparkled with moisture. Jacob stepped outside to fetch water, and saw her. A young she-wolf, silvery, cautious. With her, 3 pups. One of them bore a pale mark on his forehead. Grey, no, not him, but his blood, his movement, his spirit. The she-wolf saw Jacob. She froze. The pups pressed against her legs. The man stood still. "I didn't call for you," he whispered. "But you came." And then, from the forest, another silhouette emerged. A full-grown wolf, majestic, aging, with silver in his fur. He walked to the family, watched the man. Deep, long. It was Grey. He had returned, not to stay, just to show. Everything was as it should be. Jacob nodded, eyes glistening. "Thank you," he said. "You're home." And the wolves left, not running, not hiding, just walking into the sunrise, leaving behind soft tracks on living earth. One April day, when the sky was truly blue for the first time, and the last patches of snow had melted from the trails, Jacob stepped onto the clearing behind the cabin with a shovel in his hands. He dug slowly. With every movement, memory, not fatigue. Not farewell, but something more lasting, something rooted. He dug a small, rectangular hole, not too deep. Into it, he gently placed a wooden plaque wrapped in cloth. Inside the cloth, the collar he had taken off Grey that first night. A photograph, a strip of blood-stained bandage from when the wolf first allowed his touch. On the plaque, burned into the wood, "Grey, freedom is you." He covered the hole with soil, then planted a pine sapling beside it. Small, delicate. Someday it would be tall. Birds might nest in it, wolves might pass by and leave tracks at its base, or maybe no one would. But the memory was already here. It lived in this place. That evening, Jacob received a call from Nate. He had waited long before picking up, but when he did, the voice was filled with wonder. "Jacob, good news. Luna gave birth. 3 pups, all healthy. One of them, he has a pale mark on his forehead, just like Grey." "He lives in them," Jacob whispered. "He gave life to those who come after. He started something new." After the call, Jacob stepped onto the porch. The sky burned with stars. In the dark treetops, he imagined the night of that first meeting. He thought he heard the ice cracking on the river again, but it was within him, an echo. "You were my mirror, Grey," he said, "and I saw the best of myself in you." And just then, When he closed his eyes, he thought he heard a soft sound. Steps. No, paws, somewhere near the forest edge. He didn't turn around. He just smiled. Years passed. Yellowstone became a symbol of renewal. Gray's pack grew, migrated, taught. Researchers wrote papers, filmed documentaries, opened education centers. People came from around the world to see the wolves, especially the one who once vanished into the wild and returned to lead. But among all the stories told in journals and films, one was shared quietly, almost like folklore. The story of a man and a wolf, of winter, loneliness, a gunshot, and a trust that changed everything. Jacob never called himself a hero. He stayed in his cabin as he had promised, lived simply, never chased fame. But every year Nate came to visit with news. He's still the alpha, Nate would say. Doesn't run like he used to. But one look, and the pack follows. Getting old, Jacob would smile. So are we. They drank tea on the porch, remembered every detail of that first winter. Sometimes Emma joined them too, with her family. She had named her daughter Grace. After the legend? Jacob once asked. No, Emma said. After strength, after kindness. One summer morning, Jacob woke up even earlier than usual, not from a sound, from a feeling. He stepped onto the porch. The forest stood still. A soft breeze stirred the trees, and he knew Gray was gone. He didn't know how. He just did. Something inside released, not breaking, but gently letting go. Not pain, not sorrow, gratitude. He walked to the hill, to the pine he had planted, now tall, strong. He sat there for a long time, said nothing. And when the sun began to set behind the mountains, he whispered, "You're gone, but you stayed." Because in every gust of wind, every paw print by the stream, every flash of a wolf's eyes deep in the trees, he was there, Gray. And everything they had lived through would stay, not as a tale, but as truth, as the heart of a wolf. Years went by. Yellowstone flourished, the ecosystem balanced, Gray's descendants led new generations. Luna, his mate, had vanished into legend. But the bloodline continued. Packs crossed valleys, howled in the wind, raised pups beneath the stars. Nate kept working in the field. His name appeared in books and papers. But when he spoke about wolves, about leadership, instinct, and loyalty, he always spoke about Gray, not as a specimen, as a presence, a chapter of something larger. He often said, "There are stories you publish, and there are stories you protect." And Jacob stayed. His beard grew longer, his steps slower, but his eyes remained the same, calm, clear. He didn't seek company, but people came. Students, travellers. Sometimes they brought books and left quietly. Some simply sat with him by the fire. No questions. Because he had once looked into the eyes of the wild, and it had looked back. Every winter, when the snow returned, Jacob visited the pine he had planted. Its branches were wide now, its trunk thick. Birds nested in it, and sometimes faint paw prints appeared near the roots. He never disturbed them. He only smiled. One evening, a child from a nearby town visited with her father. She pointed to the carved wooden plaque beneath the pine and asked, "Was he your dog?" Jacob shook his head gently. "No," he said, "he was my friend." And that night, as stars returned to the Montana sky, Jacob sat by the fire. The wind whispered through the trees, and in that hush, between the crackle of the flames, he thought he heard the softest sound. A breath, a step, a memory made real. And he knew, some spirits never leave the forest, they become the forest.